A lot of my videos are filmed right here in my kitchen, but generally it's over there by my coffee bar. Today I want to take some time and show you what I've done here with the window treatments, and I'm really excited about this project. I recently did a video about my vintage 1970s camper that we've redone. And in that video, I made a curtain, like a door curtain, beaded door curtain. I wanted to take a little time to share about that, but I also made these curtains right up here to finish off the windows. When we moved in about 7 years ago, I bought these linens. They're actually napkins from the Pioneer Woman at Walmart, but I really liked the deep jewel tones, like the fall colors. That's 100% my speed. They aren't available anymore. I love how these look. I did double layer them, and I'll show you a little bit more towards the end of the video about setting it all up. But I had pretty much ignored the top of the windows. And you know, when you are used to seeing something, you just kind of ignore it and don't see it any longer, and maybe it's weird, but you don't know because you don't notice. Well, that's how it was. After making my door curtain, I thought, oh my gosh, I would really like to make some valances. That's what I set out to do, and that's what I did, and it really couldn't be easier. So let's take a couple minutes and talk about it. The process isn't hard at all. I started out by making some granny squares, and you could do whatever type of granny square you wanted. You could make them very basic like I did. You could make them with puff stitches, or whatever, depending on the type of room you're putting it in, the type of yarn you're using, what the intended purpose is. I wanted to keep these simple because it is my kitchen and they're up pretty high, and I don't think anyone's gonna notice the extra detail I went into. Plus, I did not have an excess of this yarn, so I wanted to keep it simple, not use like a yarn eater stitch, but you very well could. You very well could, however you wanted it to be. Part of this process, it's like a no pattern project because it is going to be different for any of us. It really all depends on the space that you're putting it in. So I can't tell you to make a certain amount of granny squares or to do so many rounds around it. Those are all just variables that I don't know about. It really depends on your window and how wide and how long you need this to be. And this is something you could alter in any type of way. I mean, you could actually even make the lower part of the cafe curtains out of granny squares, which would be super cute too. Possibilities are totally endless. When I started this project, I had some orange cotton that was, I believe, eco cotton or echo cotton, however you want to pronounce that. It was a red heart yarn, and I had thrifted it. I had gotten it for $1 per skein, and there was a little over 200 yards in each of these. I just thought, since I already had it on hand, I thought that would be a good choice. My husband and I kind of were like, oh, we should do either like the orange or the little mustardy color, but I already had the orange, so that's what we went with. I'm being a big girl and working out of my stash. I went into Hobby Lobby, and my husband had said something along the lines, because I said I was going to put like a little bit of a border in there because I knew I did not have enough to do just the orange. And I had said like a white or a cream because I wanted to kind of mimic all of the cream color in the lower part. And he was like, okay, but I just don't want it to look like a candy corn. Fair enough. Going with like plain white, I was like, ugh. I don't even really remember if there was a cream because I happened to find this cotton at Hobby Lobby, and it had the little bits of like I would call it like a corally orange speck, and then also like a brown speckle in it too. So I just thought it worked out good. It's not solid, it's just kind of bland, which is just fine. So to make this project, you want to start out by making your granny squares. For these valances, I made 5 granny squares. And after the granny square, I did do a couple rows of single crochet around it. And this again, I wanted it to make it a little bit more sturdy. And I know that with these being cotton, and this is kind of a hot, humid area sometimes, could end up like sagging and drooping a little. So I didn't want them too drapey from the get-go. But I went ahead and I did those couple rows of single crochet around the granny squares and kind of alternated how many were orange and how many were the cream color, and then back to orange, and that is all personal preference. When I was doing this portion of my door curtain for my camper, I was using Red Heart Super Saver in Aran Flex. I did it all that same color for the whole thing, so it was a little bit easier not having to budget out how much of each color to use. So that is kind of a tip too if you're wanting to keep it a little bit simpler to start out with. After I had gotten to the row of my orange single crochets, my rectangle really wasn't big enough. I was able to hold it up and see that it just wasn't big enough. So I did go ahead, I was stumped for a minute, I did go ahead and put a granny stitch around it. And I did every 3 stitches in that row. So I basically skipped 2 and then put my granny stitch in that 3rd one. And I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't work out perfectly even, but you really can't tell by looking at it. So you just, if you are a person who gets uptight and wants it to be perfect and perfectly spaced out, probably not going to happen. And if it does, it was probably like a fluke, a freak of nature, an act of God, something to make that work out to be perfectly symmetrical. What I did was, as I got closer to my corners, I knew I would be adding 2 granny clusters in each corner, and I did a chain 2 in each of those. I just worked it out where, you know, in one of them I only have 2 double crochets in my granny cluster because it was going to be a little bit closer and smushed, and in one of them it's actually, there's like 4, you know, where, so that there was like 3 empty stitches, and then my granny cluster went into the 4th. You just have to adapt. You just have to be okay with it. Use your best judgment. It will be completely fine. No one will be able to know once it's up there. And then I went ahead and went around the rest of the edges in my orange. And on the corners of it, I did add 3 extra stitches into those corners just to give it like a nice squared off look, because I wanted it, I did want the corners to be rectangular. With this project, I knew that I would be using these little clippy hardware. With that, I was able to save yarn by not having to create extra and like an extra fold to stick the rod through. So that is something you do want to think about, whether you are dealing with some existing curtain hardware that's on your wall already and you need to work around that and adapt to it, or if you're going to be putting up something newer like I did. And these were pretty inexpensive, so I'll try to link any of the hardware down in the description box, so you can check out what I used, or if you want to do the same thing. The difference with this, my beaded door curtain, is that I ended up the bottom couple rows, that one wasn't perfectly a symmetrical rectangle. I built it down and lower a little bit, which you could totally do with this too, but I built it down and lower. And what I did on that one was I had made a mesh for the bottom few rows to elongate it. And again, I wanted it to go from like a more solid top to getting, you know, a little bit thinner and finer, and then going into all of the beaded chains. With that one, I did a whole series for like 3 or 4 rows where I did a double crochet, chain, double crochet, chain, double crochet, all the way across for a few rows to give it that mesh look. And I'm really happy with how that turned out. When I went to go ahead and attach the chains, what I did was I decided how long the chains needed to be roughly. And this was a camper door. You do have to kind of, I don't have to duck to get in and out because I'm 5'4", but my husband has to duck to get in and out. It's a shorter door and it's very narrow, being a 70s camper. It's small, and I didn't want my chains going all the way to the floor and dragging, and I wanted to be able to swoop them over. If you were doing like a bedroom door or a closet door, whatever like that, you know, obviously you might have to make a ton more chains or make your chains much longer than I did. It felt like they were plenty long enough though, because that is so boring making all those chains. But what I did was, after I got my chains made, and I just had a yardstick, and I just kind of quickly, you know, pulled it out and laid it down to make sure it was roughly the amount of inches I wanted, which I want to say was around like 55 to 60, somewhere in there. I got all of those made. I knew how many I needed to go completely across. And then to make it a little more interesting for my project, every other one of those chains, I put a bead on the top and a bead on the bottom. It would have been too crowded to put beads on all of them. I didn't think there was any reason to weigh it down with adding extra wood beads. I got my chains, and then I went ahead and threaded you know, the extra. I made sure to leave extra yarn on each end of the chain and threaded that through, threaded my bead, tied it on there. I went ahead and tied it to that lowest row of mesh, and then went in and sewed in my end so that you couldn't see it. Same thing at the bottom. On my yarn needle, ran it through the bead, tied it, and then worked my yarn through there to hide that and snip it off. That it would just be like the bead on the bottom. I am super happy with the way this project turned out. You can see it just lays so nicely on my table as I'm, you know, getting everything prepped to go on the little hangers. Another difference between doing my curtains in here and also doing the curtain, the beaded door curtain in my camper, the way I attached it to the rod. So this is all with the little rings and clippies, but out in the camper, I knew that I wanted it to be removable at times. So if we were doing like a lot of loading up, something where we'd be going in and out a bunch of times and I didn't want to mess with it, I could just take it down. Or if I thought it was going to be a problem when we were traveling, I could just take it down and put it back up. So what we did there is I actually just used a wooden dowel I have. Like I'm a dork. I guess I have a handful of wooden dowels laying around just in case. But what I did was I measured a little bit wider than the door, and I just took my yarn needle and that same yarn, and I went through and I sewed around the dowel all the way across. So it just looped it. You know, you can still see the dowel underneath. Yes, if I wanted to, I could stain the dowel, but I don't want to. And it is just fine. You could go to, you know, a ton more effort if you wanted to. But I guess I just thought with this, since the purpose of it was being able to take it up and down in a hurry, I thought that worked perfect for me. We put two of the little, I think you call them like teacup hooks or like C hooks. So they screw in and then it's C-shaped. We just put those on both sides of the door so we could take the dowel and stick it right up in there. When we went on our first camping trip, it held up just fine. We didn't take it down while we were traveling. We had a few other obstacles, and I can link that video up here if you would like to see it, but the door curtain worked just fine. So here I am getting my napkins, which are the cafe curtains, ready. And like I said, I washed them, and I didn't have to iron them or anything. They came out pretty good. Because I have these double layered, there is one side that has faded. I think when you see the footage, it is harder to tell in the footage that it's faded, but to the naked eye, I could see it. So I made sure to get the faded ones pointed outside at the sun and get these, the insides, and I just put the clips on. You can see at some point here in the footage, my cat takes an interest in it and he makes it a little more difficult, but I just evenly spaced those little hooks out so they could slide right over the cafe rod. And I did the same thing up at the top on the crochet curtain, and I've got 6 of them up there, and you can see where it is just like a smidge droopy, like just based on how they're spread apart and everything. But so far they have been up about 2 weeks, and I really like how they're working. It's kind of nice, like when I come down in the morning and make coffee, it's just like the sunlight coming through, you know, the little granny squares and everything on the wall. The shape is kind of neat. This was a pretty easy project. I mean, my husband has gotten stuck doing a lot of home projects around here, so this one was definitely kind of a no-brainer for him. He did switch out the hardware that was down low here. He did switch those out and get rid of those just because, again, they were like 7 years old, and he wanted to ensure that they both matched. And I am super pleased with this project. This is a project where you can really make it specific to the area that you're working on. I mean, these are smaller windows because they're so old. So yours might end up, if they're a modern window, being, you might need 7 or 8 granny squares for all I know. You just got to kind of look at it and line it up as you go and be okay with adding more layers to the rectangle as you go around. Then at that point, if you want to lower it going down, you can also do that too. This is one of those where it's like fun to go with the flow. I have got a video that I think you will like as well, so I will go ahead and have that posted. And if you enjoy this type of content, I just really love crochet. I love doing projects. I love telling you about projects I've done and just sharing the journey that we're all kind of crocheting on. So if this is your type of thing, it's definitely a little bit vlog style and a little bit chatty and just a little bit random, but I would love it if you would consider subscribing if that is something you like too. Thanks for talking yarn with me.